Disabilities and the state of persons with disabilities in Nigeria. The Senate notes that the UN General Assembly, by Resolution 47-3 of 1992, proclaimed and designated December 3rd of every year as the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. Further notes that the observance of the day is intended to promote global awareness and understanding of disability issues and mobilize support for the dignity, rights, and well-being of persons with disabilities. Aware that the observance of the day seeks to increase awareness of gains to be derived from the integration and mainstreaming of disabilities in every aspect of human endeavor, including political, social, economic, and cultural lives of nations. Further aware that the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which took effect from 3rd May 2008, affirms that all persons with all types of disabilities must enjoy all human rights and fundamental freedoms, thereby protecting the rights and dignity of persons with disabilities. Observes that many nations have, through legislation, domesticated the intent of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. An example of a few include Australia, which came up with Disabilities Discrimination Act of 1992, in which it sought to eliminate discrimination against persons with disabilities, access to premises, work, accommodation, social services, and the rest. Canada came up with a national building code in 2010 to provide standards that must be complied with in the provision of infrastructure and buildings, embedding codes and practices that are user-friendly to persons with disabilities. Lebanon came up with a barrier-free environment legislation in 1998 that is favorable to persons with disabilities. The USA has its legislation tagged Americans with Disabilities Act 1990, a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination based on disability. Kenya's Persons with Disabilities Act of 2003 provides for the rights and rehabilitation of persons with disabilities and promotion of disability rights education. And notes that while Nigeria ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2007 and its optional protocol in 2010, it was only in January 2019 that President Muhammadu Buhari signed into law the Discrimination Against Persons with Disabilities Prohibition Act 2018. Of course, this followed 9 years of relentless advocacy by disability rights groups and activists. Aware, distinguished colleagues, that the law prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability and imposes sanctions, including fines and prison sentences on those who contravene it. Equally aware that the law stipulates a 5-year transitional period for modifying public buildings, structures, and automobiles to make them accessible and user-friendly for persons with disabilities. Further aware, distinguished colleagues, that the law provides for the establishment of a national commission for persons with disabilities that will be responsible for ensuring that people with disabilities have access to housing, education, and health care. The commission will be empowered to receive complaints and rights violations and support victims to seek legal redress, among other duties. Concerned that according to the World Health 2011 World Disability Report, About 15% of Nigeria's population, or at least 25 million people, have disability. Many of them face a number of human rights abuses, including stigma, discrimination, violence, and lack of access to healthcare, housing, and education. Equally concerned that persons with disabilities are still challenged by accessibility and participation in Nigeria, an indication that disabilities issues are far from being mainstreamed under our jurisdiction. Perturbed that persons with disabilities still face discrimination in the areas of equal access and full participation in the political, social, economic, and cultural aspect of our national life, and as well as in employment and decent work. Notes that the International Day of Persons with Disabilities is an opportunity for the nation to celebrate and applaud the role and contribution of persons with disabilities in nation building in all sectors, especially the Paralympic sportsmen and women who have always done Nigeria proud. I therefore urge the Senate to resolve, 1, to urge the federal government to fully implement the provisions of the Discrimination Against Persons with Disabilities Prohibition Act 2018, especially the composition and establishment of the National Commission for Persons with Disabilities. 2, urge Ministry of Works and Housing and other MDAs involved in infrastructure and public buildings to adopt codes and standards that are user-friendly to persons with disabilities. 3, urge Ministry of Land Transportation and Transport operators to be aware of their obligations to persons with disabilities. And finally, 4, urge Ministry of Information and National Orientation Agency to undertake aggressive awareness campaign against all forms of discrimination against persons with disabilities. Distinguished colleagues and President of the Senate, I so move.